The first thing Susan noticed wasn't the beeping monitors or the antiseptic smell of the ICU. It was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, a void where warmth should have been. She had been under for 3 weeks. A freak viral meningitis infection had taken her from a board meeting to a ventilator in under 24 hours. She remembered the ambulance, the staring pain behind her eyes, and her last conscious thought. Did I send the payroll approval for my staff? When her eyes finally fluttered open, heavy with sedation, she expected to see relief. She expected tears from Chloe, her younger sister whom she'd put through private school. She expected a sheepish grin from Mark, her brother whose gambling debts she secretly paid off monthly. She expected the stern, comforting presence of Aunt Beatrice, who had raised them after their parents died in that car crash 20 years ago. They were all there, but the tableau was wrong. Chloe was checking her Cartier watch, a watch Susan knew Chloe couldn't afford. Mark wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window, vibrating with nervous energy. Aunt Beatrice sat perfectly still, her hands clasped over a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously like Susan's own executive binder. "Oh, good. You're awake," Beatrice said. Her voice lacked any inflection of joy. It was the tone one uses when a delayed appliance finally arrives. "Water," Susan croaked, her throat feeling like it was filled with broken glass. Chloe didn't move to the pitcher. Instead, she stepped forward, her expression hardened into something Susan didn't recognize. "We need to talk, Sue. The doctors say you're out of the woods, cognitively speaking, which is good, because we have paperwork." Susan tried to sit up, alarm bells piercing the morphine haze. "Paperwork? What? Where's my company phone?" "You don't need it anymore," Mark said to the window. Beatrice opened the portfolio. The sound of the zipper seemed deafening in the quiet room. "While you were incapacitated, Susan, certain decisions had to be made. Hard decisions, for the good of the family." The dread that washed over Susan was colder than the IV fluids pumping into her vein. It wasn't just fear. It was a primal recognition of a predator in the room. And the predators were wearing the faces of the people she lived for. The next hour was a blur of legalese and betrayal delivered with surgical precision. Susan's mind, still sluggish from weeks of induced coma, couldn't process the speed at which they were dismantling her life. "You gave me power of attorney 5 years ago, remember? For emergencies," Beatrice stated calmly, sliding a document across the rolling hospital tray. "This was an emergency." Susan looked at the papers. Her vision swam, but the words were clear enough to see. Asset liquidation, transfer of deed, sale agreement. "What did you do?" Susan whispered. "What is this? Aether Designs, sold?" "We got a very good price, considering the founder was practically dead," Chloe snapped, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. "Horizon Court bought it, lock, stock, and barrel. The client list, the patents, the downtown office space, it's gone, Sue." Susan felt the EKG monitor speed up, a frantic beep, beep, beep filling the room. Aether Designs wasn't just a company. It was 15 years of 18-hour days. It was the legacy she built to ensure her siblings never felt the poverty they experienced after their parents died in that car crash 20 years ago. It was her identity. "You can't sell it. It's mine," Susan gasped, trying to reach for the call button to summon a nurse, a lawyer, anyone. Mark finally turned from the window. He looked healthier than she'd seen him in years. New clothes, a fresh haircut, the look of a man whose debts had miraculously vanished. "It's already done, Susan. The sale closed 4 days ago. The money has been dispersed." "Dispersed to where?" Susan demanded, her voice gaining strength from sheer panic. Beatrice placed a single bank statement on top of the pile. It was for a new trust named the CBM Family Trust. Chloe, Beatrice, Mark. Susan's name was nowhere on it. The balance was staggering. 8 figures. Her life's work converted into a number they controlled. "We had to protect the assets," Beatrice said soothingly, as if explaining why they put down a sick dog. "You were vulnerable. We couldn't risk the market crashing while you were in a coma. We did this for us." The us hung in the air, a heavy, toxic cloud that explicitly excluded Susan. Susan spent 2 more weeks in the hospital. She recovered physically with astonishing speed, driven by a rage so potent it seemed to burn the lingering infection out of her blood. She refused to see them again. She called her lawyer from the hospital phone, only to find out he was now representing the CBM Trust due to a conflict of interest clause she didn't remember signing. She tried to call her bank, only to find her personal accounts frozen, flagged for suspicious activity linked to the massive sale of her company. When she was finally discharged, still weak but walking on her own, she took a taxi to the Victorian home in the suburbs she had bought 3 years ago, the family hub where they all gathered for Sunday dinners. Her key didn't work. She stood on the porch, shivering in the thin jacket the hospital social worker had found for her, jiggling the deadbolt. The tumblers wouldn't catch. The front door opened, but the security chain remained engaged. Aunt Beatrice's face appeared in the crack. "Aunt B, let me in. It's freezing." "You can't stay here." Susan. She wasn't even pretending to be kind anymore. The mask was off. Behind Beatrice, Susan could see movers hauling boxes. Her boxes. "This is my house. My name is on the deed." "Actually, Mark bought the deed from the trust last week. He's always wanted this place. You know how he gets." "You stole my company, and now you're stealing my house?" Susan screamed, slamming her hand against the doorframe. "We aren't monsters, Susan," Beatrice said, sliding a white envelope through the crack in the door. It landed at Susan's feet. "There's $5,000 cash in there. It's enough for a motel and to get you started. We agreed it was best if you took some time away. You're too volatile right now. You need to heal." The door shut. The deadbolt clicked home. Susan stood on the porch of the home she paid for, staring at the envelope. $5,000. That was the severance package from the family she had dedicated her adult life to supporting. She had built a castle to protect them, and they had thrown her over the battlements the moment she turned her back. The motel was called the Blue Heron, although there was nothing blue or majestic about it. It sat near the highway overpass on the bad side of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. Susan sat on the sagging mattress of room 114. Her possessions consisted of the clothes on her back, a plastic bag of toiletries from the hospital, and an envelope with $4,800 remaining. She hadn't cried yet, not once since waking up in the ICU. The shock was so profound, acting as an anesthetic against the reality of her situation. She stared at the textured ceiling, tracing the water stains. She replayed the last 15 years in her mind. Every sacrifice, every missed date, every canceled vacation so she could land a client to pay for Chloe's semester abroad or bail Mark out of a bookie's basement. She had always viewed herself as the shepherd, the strong older sister protecting the flock. She realized now she hadn't been a shepherd. She had been a host, and they were parasites that had finally grown large enough to consume her entirely. The realization was physical. It started in her stomach, a churning nausea that wasn't from the lingering effects of the meningitis. It was disgust. Disgust at them for their profound greed, yes, but mostly disgust at herself for her blindness. How many signs had she missed? Chloe's increasing demands for money, thinly veiled as emergencies. Mark's sly questions about how her corporate structuring worked. Beatrice's constant pressure to update her will and power of attorney, just in case. They hadn't just taken her money. They had retroactively poisoned every memory of love and support she thought they shared. Every "I love you, Susie" now sounded like a lie calculated to keep the cash flow open.
She curled onto her side on the filthy bedspread. The numbness was fading, replaced by an agony so sharp it felt like her bones were breaking. Tonight she would allow herself to break. Tonight she would mourn the death of her family. The next morning Susan woke up. She wasn't refreshed, but the agonizing, weeping grief of the previous night had calcified into something hard and heavy in her chest. She walked to the cracked bathroom mirror. The woman staring back was gaunt, pale, her hair limp and oily. Her eyes, usually bright with intelligence and humor, were two burnt-out cinders. "You died in that hospital," she whispered to her reflection. The Susan who forgave Mark every time he stole from her purse was dead. The Susan who cheerfully wrote checks for Chloe's disastrous business ventures was dead. The Susan who craved Aunt Beatrice's approval was dead and buried. She needed to formalize it. She dressed in the same clothes and walked 3 miles to the nearest public library. She used one of the free computers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She didn't search for lawyers. She knew that route was pointless. Beatrice was meticulous. The paperwork would be ironclad. They had likely used her own corporate lawyers against her to ensure the theft was technically legal under the sweeping power of attorney she'd foolishly signed. Instead, she searched for obituaries. She found a template and began to type. Susan Vance, 34, beloved sister and niece, passed away tragically following a brief illness. A private family service was held. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations be made to the Gamblers Anonymous Fund. She paid $20 to have it run in the local independent newspaper the next day. It was petty. It was small, but it was necessary. It was her public declaration that as far as the CBM Trust was concerned, Susan Vance no longer existed. They wanted her gone? Fine. She would grant their wish. She walked out of the library, the cool air hitting her face. She had no company, no home, no family, and almost no money. She was terrified. But for the first time in her adult's life, she was also entirely free of the burden of carrying 3 grown adults on her back. The parasites had detached. Now the host could finally heal. And once she healed, she would hunt. A week later, Susan, now going by her middle name, Elena, found a job. It was under the table, washing dishes at a greasy diner on the trucker route that ran past the motel. The pay was abysmal, the hot water scalded her hands red, and the manager, a man named Sal with wandering eyes, was constantly hovering. It was perfect. It was invisible. Elena worked double shifts, keeping her head down, letting the mindless rhythm of scrub, rinse, stack numb her brain. She ate the mistake orders for dinner to save money. She moved out of the motel and into a tiny, damp basement apartment rented by an elderly woman who preferred cash and didn't ask for references. Her room had a single high window that looked out onto an alley. In the center of the cracked concrete grew a stubborn, gnarled juniper bush. It was ugly, covered in city soot, but it refused to die. It thrived on neglect and bad soil. Elena stared at that bush every night. The juniper became her totem. During the day, she washed dishes. At night, she went to the library. She needed to understand the enemy. She started by tracking the sale of Aether Designs. Horizon Corp was a massive conglomerate known for acquiring innovative startups and stripping them for parts. They didn't want Susan's vision. They wanted her patents. Then she tracked the money. The CBM Trust. It was hard to pierce the veil of privacy, but social media was a gold mine for narcissists with sudden wealth. Chloe's Instagram, previously filled with complaints about being broke, was now a vomit of luxury. Check-ins at 5-star resorts in the Maldives, a new penthouse in the city center, designer wardrobe hauls, #blessed, #self-made. Mark was less public, but Elena knew where to look. She checked the online forums for high-stakes poker tournaments. there he was, registered for a $50,000 buy-in event in Vegas under the handle Phoenix Rising. Beatrice was the hardest to track. She was old school. But Elena found a newsletter for the city's elite Historical Preservation Society. Beatrice was listed as a newly minted Diamond Benefactor, a title that cost at least $500,000 in donations. They weren't just spending the money, they were gorging themselves on her corpse. She knew she couldn't outspend them, and she couldn't outlawyer them. She had to outthink them. She needed access. Her old company, Aether, had built its reputation on seamless, intuitive design. But Susan's true genius lay in the back-end architecture. She built systems that were robust, secure, and complex. When Horizon Corp bought Aether, they inherited Susan's servers. They inherited her code. One rainy Tuesday night, sitting in the library basement, Elena pulled up the login portal for Aether's internal network. It had been rebranded with Horizon's colors, but the structure was hers. Her old credentials would be long gone, deleted within minutes of the sale. But Susan hadn't just been the CEO. She was the lead architect, and every architect leaves a signature. Years ago, during a particularly grueling crunch time, she had embedded a break-glass diagnostic account deep in the kernel of the system. It was designed for catastrophic failures, a backdoor that bypassed standard authentication protocols. Hard-coded with a username that was an anagram of her mother's favorite flower. She stared at the blinking cursor in the username field. Did they find it? Horizon had armies of IT security experts. It was highly probable they had scrubbed the code clean during the migration. If they caught someone trying to use it, the trace would be immediate. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the first real risk. This was a felony. The Susan who built Aether would never have done this. Elena, the dishwasher living in a basement, didn't hesitate. She typed the username. She typed the password, a string of numbers corresponding to the dates of her parents' births and deaths. Enter. The screen hung for a terrifying second. Welcome, Admin Orchid. She was in. Being inside the Horizon servers felt like walking through her childhood home after strangers had redecorated it with cheap furniture. They had butchered her elegant code, patching in clumsy corporate spyware and bloated tracking protocols. Elena didn't have much time. The Horizon server's admin systems were top tier. Her backdoor wouldn't remain invisible for long. She wasn't looking for corporate secrets to sell. She was looking for communications. She navigated to the archived email servers, specifically targeting the weeks leading up to and during her coma. She searched for emails originating outside the company, specifically from Beatrice's encrypted email address. She found it. A folder labeled Acquisition External. Her breath hitched as she opened the first email, dated only 2 days after she was admitted to the hospital. From Beatrice Vance at securemail.com to J. Sterling at horizoncorp.com, VP of Acquisitions. Subject, an opportunity regarding Aether Designs. Mr. Sterling, as discussed, the primary obstacle to acquisition is currently incapacitated, and the prognosis is unfavorable. As holder of full power of attorney, I am prepared to expedite a sale immediately, provided the terms are favorable and, crucially, discreet. My niece's unfortunate condition presents a unique window for Horizon to acquire her IP without the usual lengthy negotiations. Elena read on, nauseous. It was all there. The cold calculation. Beatrice had reached out to them. She had used Susan's coma as a bargaining chip to force a quick, undervalued sale in exchange for immediate liquidity. There were replies from Chloe whining about how fast they could get the cash, emails from Mark asking if the sale included Susan's personal real estate portfolio. It was the anatomy of a murder spread out in digital correspondence. They hadn't panicked when she got sick. They had celebrated the opportunity. Elena downloaded everything to an encrypted thumb drive. Then, before logging off, she did one more thing. She planted a tiny, dormant daemon program deep in the Horizon payroll subsystem, a delayed action logic bomb. She didn't activate it, not yet. It was just insurance. She logged out, pulled the thumb drive from the library computer, and walked out into the rain. She felt lighter. The grief was gone, entirely replaced by icy clarity. She finally had the weapon. Now, she needed the battle plan.
Elena needed a new skill set. Hacking was one thing, but social engineering was another. Chloe lived her entire life online, broadcasting her movements, her desires, and her insecurities to a curated audience of strangers. Elena created a fake persona on Instagram, Anya_V, a supposed heiress to an Eastern European shipping fortune. She bought a few thousand bot followers to give the account legitimacy, filled the feed with stock photos of yachts and designer handbags, and began the slow process of orbiting Chloe's digital world. She started by liking Chloe's posts, not immediately, but a few hours after they went up, like a busy peer. Then came the comments, short, validating, using the same vapid language Chloe and her friends used. Obsessed with this look, babe. Only you could pull this off. It took 3 weeks for Chloe to notice. A rich stranger validating her was catnip to Chloe's starved ego. Chloe followed Anya_V back. Elena waited another week before sliding into Chloe's DMs. Anya_V. Hey gorgeous, I'm frantic. My usual stylist for the Monaco charity gala just canceled on me. I saw that divine vintage Dior you wore last month. Who was your person? I'm desperate. It was a lie tailored perfectly for Chloe. It appealed to her vanity, implied she was part of an exclusive club, and presented an opportunity for her to show off. Chloe B. Vance 00. OMG, stop. That Dior was a total find. I actually styled that myself. It's so hard to find good help, right? Anya_V. Stop. You did that? You have an incredible eye. Have you ever considered doing it professionally? My circle is always looking for fresh talent. The hook was set. Chloe, who had never held a real job in her life, suddenly saw herself as a burgeoning fashion mogul. They began messaging daily. Elena, as Anya, fed Chloe's delusions of grandeur, slowly steering the conversation toward business, investment, and the burden of managing large amounts of capital. Mark was a different kind of addict. His vice wasn't validation. It was adrenaline. The high of the win, the crushing low of the loss. It was the only thing that made him feel alive. Elena knew he was in Vegas. The Phoenix Rising handle was active on the poker forums, bragging about small wins and suspiciously silent about losses. She couldn't go to Vegas. She didn't have the money or the desire to be near him. But Mark's weakness was that he thought he was smarter than the house. Elena spent her nights at the library diving into the dark web forums dedicated to illicit gambling. It was a cesspool, but she found what she was looking for. An underground online casino operating out of Malta, known for high stakes and loose regulation. It was invite only. Using her Anya_V persona, who was now established as a wealthy woman with bored, rich male friends, she managed to secure an invite code. She created an account. She didn't have the money to play, but she didn't need to. She needed to be the cooler. She found Mark at a virtual Texas Hold'em table. He was up 50 grand, playing aggressive, sloppy poker, bullying the table with his chip stack. Elena logged in as an observer. She began typing in the chat, posing as a male high roller. Observer King Midas. Phoenix is playing scared money, bets big on the flop, but folds to any real pressure on the river. Classic tell. It was a lie. Mark wasn't scared, he was reckless. But Mark read the chat. He bristled. Phoenix Rising.
Put your money where your mouth is, Midas, or are you just here to watch the big boys play? Observer King Midas. I only play heads up, no limit, but you don't have the stomach for that. Elena knew Mark. He couldn't resist a direct challenge to his ego. 2 hours later, he had left the public table and was in a private heads-up room with a whale he thought he could hustle. Elena wasn't playing him. She had hired a professional online grinder, a math whiz in Estonia she found on a hacker forum, paying him with the promise of a percentage of the winnings. Mark was about to learn the difference between luck and skill. Beatrice was the fortress. She had no social media addiction, no gambling vice. Her drug was control and reputation. She was the pillar of the community, the keeper of the family flame, the respectable face of their quiet treachery. Beatrice's weakness was her past. Before she took in Susan and her siblings, Beatrice had worked in high-end real estate in the 80s. There had always been whispers about why she left that lucrative career so suddenly to focus on family years before the car crash even happened. Elena used the last of her initial $5,000 to hire a private investigator. Not a good one. They asked too many questions. She hired a sleazy one, an ex-cop who worked out of a strip mall and didn't care about ethics. I need dirt on Beatrice Vance. 1985 to 1990, real estate dealings, specifically anything involving the Oak Haven Development Project. Susan remembered finding an old newspaper clipping about Oak Haven in Beatrice's attic years ago. It was a massive luxury condo project that had been halted due to environmental concerns, bankrupting several investors. Beatrice's name hadn't been in the article, but Susan remembered her aunt's strange reaction when she asked about it. A flash of genuine terror before the mask of composure slipped back into place. The PI called her 3 days later. You were right. It's buried deep. Sealed records. But I know a guy in the county clerk's office who owes me a favor. It's gonna cost you another grand. Elena didn't have another grand. Get me the file, she said, her voice cold steel. You'll get your money when I have the documents. She hung up. She had to rob Peter to pay Paul. It was time to cash in on Mark's bad night. The Estonian grinder had done his job perfectly. He had toyed with Mark for 4 hours, letting him win small pots, building his confidence, then crushing him in 3 massive hands. Mark had lost $200,000, money he didn't have liquid. He had signed electronic markers, IOUs directly to the shady casino operators. Elena, posing as the casino manager, sent Mark a secure message. Mr. Vance, your markers are due. The total is $215,000 with interest. Immediate wire transfer is required. Mark's reply was frantic. I need a few days. My funds are tied up in a trust. I'm good for it, I swear. Just give me until Monday. Elena waited an hour before replying, letting him sweat. Our liquidity providers are not patient men, Mr. Vance. However, we may be able to work out an arrangement. We have a client interested in acquiring certain niche assets. We understand you hold the deed to a Victorian property at 445 Maple Avenue. It was Susan's house. Mark's reply was almost instantaneous. Yes, I own it free and clear. It's worth at least $600K. We will accept the deed as collateral against your debt. We will hold it for 30 days. If the debt is paid, you get it back. If not, the property is forfeited. We can have a digital courier there with the paperwork in an hour. Mark signed. He signed away Susan's home to cover a gambling debt to a shadow corporation controlled by Susan herself. Elena felt a grim satisfaction as she received digital confirmation of the deed transfer. She owned her house again. Well, her shell company did. She wired the $1,000 to the PI. The PI came through. The file was thin, but explosive. The Oak Haven development wasn't stopped by environmental concerns. That was the cover story. It was stopped because the land was a known toxic waste dump that Beatrice and her partners had paid off county officials to ignore. There were copies of cash checks with Beatrice's signature on them, payments to a zoning inspector who had later died in a suspicious single-car accident. There were internal memos where Beatrice explicitly discussed managing the optics if children living in the future condos started getting sick. It was racketeering, bribery, and negligent homicide, all wrapped up in the manila folder. The statute of limitations had likely passed on the crimes themselves, but the reputational damage, that was timeless. If this got out, Beatrice, the diamond benefactor of the Historical Preservation Society, would be a pariah. Her meticulously crafted facade of respectable old money would shatter. Elena sat in her basement room, the documents spread out on the cheap linoleum floor under the single sputtering light bulb. Her hands were raw, her back ached, but her mind was a razor. She thought about the juniper bush outside her window. It didn't fight the toxic environment. It adapted to it. It became harder, thornier. They had tried to bury her. They forgot.
She wasn't going to leak it to the press. Not yet. That was a blunt instrument. Beatrice required a scalpel. She scanned the most damning documents. She composed a physical letter using high-quality paper she stole from a stationery store. No return address. Just a single sheet inside with photocopies of the checks and the memo. Dear Beatrice, the past is never truly buried. The Oak Haven soil remembers. I wonder what your friends at the Historical Society would think of your contribution to local history. A concerned citizen. She mailed it to Beatrice's home address. Then she waited. While Mark was sweating over his lost house and Beatrice was about to receive a ghost from her past, Chloe was getting impatient. Anya, babe, seriously, when can we meet? I have so many ideas for this fashion venture. I'm ready to invest. Elena knew Chloe was desperate to prove she was a businesswoman, desperate to match the lifestyle of her new friend. Darling, I'm currently on the yacht in the Aegean. But you're right. We need to move. My financial advisor, Mr. Henderson, is back in the States. I've authorized him to vet you for a partnership in my new boutique line. If he gives the thumbs up, we can pool our capital. I'm thinking $500K buy-in for equal partnership. $500,000. It was a massive chunk of Chloe's share of the trust. $500K is absolutely no problem. When can I meet him? Mr. Henderson was, of course, Sal, the greasy diner manager. Elena had caught him skimming from the till weeks ago. She hadn't turned him in. Instead, she offered him a deal. Wear a cheap suit, rent an hourly office space downtown for one afternoon, play the role of a bored, rich financial advisor, and she wouldn't send the video evidence of his theft to the franchise owners. Sal agreed, sweating. Elena prepped him relentlessly. You say very little. You look at her with mild disdain. You ask to see proof of funds. You mention exclusive opportunities and aggressive growth strategies. You take her check, tell her our legal team will be in touch for the contract signing, and you leave. The meeting was set for Friday. It was Thursday night. The pieces were all in motion. Mark was terrified, living in a house he no longer owned, desperately trying to scrape together cash before his 30 days were up, unaware his creditor was his dead sister. Beatrice would have received the letter today. Elena pictured her aunt, the blood draining from her face, the frantic checks of her home security system, the paranoia taking root. Chloe was preparing to hand over $500,000 to a con man in a rented office, believing she was buying her way into high society. And Elena? Elena was still washing dishes. She stood at the sink,
the steam rising around her face. Her hands were raw, her back ached, but her mind was a razor. She thought about the juniper bush outside her window. It didn't fight the toxic environment. It adapted to it. It became harder, thornier. They had tried to bury her. They forgot she was a seed. The time for preparation was over. The time of execution had arrived. The Juniper Protocol was fully active. Friday afternoon. Elena sat in a coffee shop across the street from the office building where Sal was meeting Chloe. She wore oversized sunglasses and a hoodie. She saw Chloe arrive in a brand new Mercedes convertible, looking like a starlet, oblivious to the fact that she was walking into a slaughter. 45 minutes later, Chloe exited, beaming, clutching a glossy folder of fake projections Elena had printed at Kinko's. Sal left 10 minutes later, looking pale and clammy, clutching a cashier's check for $500,000 made out to a shell company Elena controlled. The first domino had officially fallen. Chloe's money was gone. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a burner number she'd set up for the casino. A message from Mark. "I have a buyer for the car. I can wire $40K today. Please, I need more time on the house." Elena ignored it. Let him sweat. Then another buzz. A Google alert she had set up for Beatrice Vance and Historical Preservation Society. An emergency board meeting had been called that evening. The agenda was vague, addressing recent disturbing allegations. Beatrice had panicked. Instead of hiding the letter, she had likely tried to get ahead of it, to spin it to her board before it leaked. A classic control freak mistake. She assumed she could manage the narrative. Elena smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in 3 moves. The trap wasn't just sprung. It was closing around their necks. 72 hours passed. For Chloe, it was an eternity of refreshing her inbox. AV_ had gone silent. Her Instagram account, once vibrant with stolen luxury photos, had vanished. User not found. Chloe called the number on the business card Sal had given her. It was disconnected. She drove back to the office building downtown. The receptionist told her that Mr. Henderson's firm had rented the space for a single afternoon paying cash and left no forwarding address. Chloe sat in her Mercedes, the leather interior suddenly feeling claustrophobic. $500,000 gone. She pulled up her bank app. The CBM trust balance was significantly lighter. She felt sick. She hadn't just lost the money. She had lost the validation. The dream of being a fashion mogul was replaced by the terrifying reality that she was a mark. She couldn't tell Beatrice. Beatrice would kill her. And Mark was too busy with his own downward spiral to help anyone. Chloe did the only thing she knew how to do when faced with the problem. She went shopping. She drove to the highest-end boutique in the city, needing the dopamine hit of a purchase to numb the panic. She bought a $12,000 handbag to the counter and slapped down her black Amex linked to the trust. Declined. The salesgirl offered a pitying smile. "Perhaps you have another card." Chloe's world tilted on its axis. Beatrice stood at the head of the polished mahogany table in the Historical Society's boardroom. She was composed, elegant in a vintage Chanel suit, her spine steel. "I've called this meeting to address some vile rumors being circulated by jealous parties. Attempts to besmirch my character regarding ancient real estate dealings." She was prepared to spin a tale of youthful naivete, of being taken advantage of by unscrupulous male partners back in the 80s. She would paint herself as a victim who had spent decades atoning through philanthropy. Beatrice, please sit down, interrupted Mrs. Gable, the board chairwoman, a woman whose old money made Beatrice look like loose change. Beatrice froze. Excuse me? Mrs. Gable slid a manila folder down the table. It was identical to the one Alina had mailed Beatrice. We all received copies this morning, Beatrice. Anonymous courier. Mrs. Gable opened the folder. Bribing zoning officials, burying toxic waste reports. It's monstrous. It's forgeries, lies planted by my enemies, Beatrice cried, her composure cracking. We made some calls. The signatures match. The dates match the public records of the Oak Haven disaster, Mrs. Gable said coldly. We cannot have this stain on our organization. You are removal effective immediately. We expect your resignation from all associate committees by morning. Beatrice looked around the table. The faces of the city's elite, people she had spent 20 years courting, were stone. She wasn't one of them anymore. She was toxic waste. Mark was vibrating with terror. The 30-day deadline on the house was up tomorrow. The casino, Elena, had sent a final notice, pay the $215,000 debt plus penalties, or eviction proceedings would begin immediately. He couldn't lose the house. It was the only tangible thing he had left. Beatrice would eviscerate him if she knew he gambled away Susan's home. He logged into the CBM trust account. His heart nearly stopped. The balance was down by $500,000. Chloe, that idiot spendthrift. Rage mixed with desperation. If Chloe could take that much, so could he. He just needed one big win. He wouldn't play poker this time. It was too slow. He needed fast action. He transferred $300,000 from the trust to an offshore sports betting site. There was a heavyweight boxing match that night in Macau. The favorite was unstoppable, 10-1 odds. It was free money, a sure thing. He put it all on the favorite to win by knockout in the first 3 rounds. He sat in the dark living room of Susan's house, watching the fight on the massive TV he bought with stolen money. In the second round, the underdog landed a lucky haymaker, the favorite one down. He didn't get up. Mark stared at the screen as the referee counted to 10. 10 seconds that erased $300,000. He was ruined. The house was gone. The trust was hemorrhaging. He heard a noise on the porch. He looked out the peephole. A man in a cheap suit was taping a notice to the door. Notice to quit. Eviction in 24 hours. While Susan's siblings were imploding, a different kind of disaster was striking Horizon Corp. It started at 3 a.m. The payroll system, bloatware running on top of Susan's original architecture, seized up. The logic bomb Elena had planted weeks ago executed its simple command. It encrypted the entire payroll database with a key that existed only in her head. By 9 a.m., when the East Coast markets opened, Horizon couldn't pay its 50,000 employees globally. News leaked instantly. Horizon's stock price began to freefall. In the C-suite, panic reigned. Their IT department was helpless. They tried to restore from backups, but the bomb had corrupted those too. "Give me the original documentation for the Aether architecture," the CEO screamed. "We don't have it," the CTO admitted, pale. "We scrubbed it during the migration. We thought it was redundant." "Who built this?" "Susan Vance, but she's dead." "Well, find someone who knows her code. Dig her up if you have to." They started frantically searching the system log, looking for anything that could help. A junior analyst found something strange in the kernel access logs. "Sir, someone accessed the admin Orchid break-glass account 3 weeks ago. It came from an external IP address." "Where?" "A public library on 5th and Main." Elena was scrubbing a pot encrusted with burnt lasagna when the diner door opened. It wasn't truckers. It was 3 men in $5,000 suits. looking wildly out of place among the vinyl booths and smell of fry grease. Sal, the manager, looked terrified. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of the suits held up a tablet with a grainy photo from a library security camera. It was Susan, wearing her hoodie, plugging in a thumb drive. "We're looking for this woman. We traced her to this location." Sal looked at the photo, then looked toward the kitchen portal. "Elena, get out here." Elena wiped her raw, red hands on her apron and stepped out. She didn't look at Sal. She looked straight at the man holding the tablet, the CTO of Horizon Corp. She pulled the hairnet off, letting her hair fall around her gaunt face. She stood up straight, shedding the hunch of the manual laborer, adopting the posture of the CEO she used to be. "You're looking for Susan Vance," she said, her voice rough from disuse but steady. The CTO stared. "You're supposed to be dead." "I got better," she said flatly. "You have a payroll encryption problem. It's using a polymorphic cipher based on the Fibonacci sequence. Your team won't crack it in this lifetime." The CTO's jaw dropped. "How do you know that?" Susan smiled, a cold, sharp thing. "Because I wrote it." They didn't take her to the police. They took her to a boardroom overlooking the city, the same building where her company used to be housed. The CEO of Horizon was there. He looked ready to stroke out. The stock was down 40% in 6 hours. "Fix it," the CEO demanded. "Name your price. $1 million? 2? Susan sat at the head of the table, wearing her grease-stained diner uniform. She looked more powerful than any of them. "I don't want your money," she said. "I want what's mine." She laid it out. The sale of Aether Designs was fraudulent. It was executed by my power of attorney based on the false premise that I was permanently incapacitated or dead. I am neither. The contract is void, ab initio. "We paid $80 million for it," the CEO sputtered. "You paid it to a trust controlled by thieves. Here is my price to unlock your payroll. You publicly announce the sale is under review due to fraud. You freeze the assets of the CBM Trust immediately pending litigation. And you reinstate me as CEO of Aether Designs, operating as an independent subsidiary under your umbrella with full autonomy." "That's extortion," the corporate counsel hissed. Susan leaned forward. "No. Extortion is stealing a woman's life's work while she's in a coma. This is just business negotiation. You have until the markets close to decide. Every minute you wait, your stock drops another point." She waited. It took them 20 minutes. They had no choice. The lawyers drafted the agreement. Susan signed her name, her real name, for the first time in months. Then she leaned over the CTO's laptop, typed a 30-character string of code, and hit enter. On the big screen on the wall, the red warning lights turned green. The payroll system began to process. Susan stood up. "I'll need an advance on my salary and a car. I have a family reunion to attend." The world was collapsing for the Vance siblings. Chloe was stranded at the mall, her cards declined, her phone blowing up with notifications about frozen accounts. She called Mark in a panic. Mark didn't answer. He was sitting on the curb outside the Victorian house, watching the casino's movers, hired by Elena, put his furniture on the lawn. He was broke, homeless, and owed dangerous people hundreds of thousands of dollars. Beatrice was in her study, surrounded by packed boxes of her awards and plaques, having been unceremoniously escorted out of the Historical Society building. She tried to transfer money from the trust to a secure offshore account to flee a country. Transaction failed. Account frozen due to pending legal action regarding fraudulent conveyance. Fraud. The word flashed on her screen. They all had the same instinct. Retreat to the center. to the house. Mark was already there. Chloe took an Uber she couldn't pay for. Beatrice drove her sensible sedan, her knuckles white on the wheel. They convened on the front lawn of Susan's house as dusk fell, surrounded by Mark's evicted furniture. "What is happening?" Chloe sobbed, mascara running down her face. "All the money is locked." "Someone targeted us," Beatrice hissed, her eyes wild. "The Oakhaven leak, the frozen accounts, it's a coordinated attack." "I lost the house," Mark whispered, staring at the ground. "I gambled it away." "You what?" Beatrice screamed, lunging at him. A pair of headlights swept across the lawn, blinding them. A sleek black town car pulled into the driveway, scattering them. The driver got out and opened the rear passenger door. A woman stepped out. She wore a tailored black power suit that cost more than Mark's car. Her hair was perfectly styled. She looked healthy, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar. Chloe gasped. Beatrice grabbed her chest. Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Susan?" Mark whispered. Susan walked past them, up the porch steps of her house. She stepped over a velvet armchair that used to be in Mark's den. She put her key in the deadbolt. It turned smoothly. She opened the door, turned back to the three people huddled on her lawn, and smiled. It was the sweetest smile they had ever seen. "I'm home. We need to talk about rent." They sat in the living room. Mark on the velvet armchair he had tried to evict. Chloe huddled on the sofa she'd bought with stolen money. Beatrice stiff-backed on a dining chair. Susan didn't sit. She stood by the fireplace, the only warmth in the room coming from the gas logs she had just switched on. The air conditioner was still blasting, a remnant of Mark's sweaty panic. "The police are on their way, aren't they?" Mark mumbled, head in his hands. "Just get it over with, Susan." "Don't be stupid," Beatrice snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "Susan doesn't want a scandal any more than we do. It would ruin the company's reputation just as she got it back." She looked at Susan, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "We can work this out, Susan. We're family. We made a terrible mistake, grieving for you." Susan laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and startling in the tense room. "Grieving. Beatrice, I read your emails to Horizon. You sold me 3 days after I was admitted. You weren't grieving. You were calculating exchange rates." She walked over to the window, looking out at the dark juniper bush in the alley, visible even from here. "You know, when I was living in that basement, washing dishes, I realized something. I realized I had been building this family wrong for 15 years. I was the foundation, taking all the weight, letting you build your ridiculous, ornate lives on top of me. And the moment the foundation cracked, you didn't try to repair it. You tried to sell the bricks." She turned back to them. Her expression wasn't angry. It was clinical. "The police aren't coming, Mark. Prison is too messy. It's too public. And, quite frankly, it's too easy for you." "So, what do you want?" Chloe cried. "You froze the trust. We can't even buy food. Isn't that enough?" "The trust isn't just frozen, Chloe," Susan said softly. "It's empty." A stunned silence fell over the room. "What?" Beatrice whispered. "I didn't just leverage Horizon into giving me my job back. I leveraged them into voiding the original sale entirely due to fraud. That means the $80 million they paid the CBM Trust, it had to be returned today, every penny." Chloe let out a strangled sound. But we spent some of it. I spent $500,000 on that investment. Mark lost $300,000 on a fight. I know. Which means the CBM Trust is currently overdrawn by roughly $1 million. Horizon's lawyers are very aggressive about recovering debts resulting from fraud. They won't just take your assets. They will garnish your wages for the rest of your natural lives. You three are currently worth less than zero. She let the reality sink in. They weren't just back to where they started before she got sick. They were in an abyss of debt they could never climb out of. Mark began to openly weep. Beatrice looked gray, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Chloe stared into space, catatonic. "You utterly destroyed us," Beatrice murmured. "No," Susan corrected. "I just balanced the ledger. You tried to erase me. I simply returned the favor. Now, we can discuss the terms of your surrender." Susan pulled 3 thick packets of documents from her designer briefcase and dropped one in front of each sibling. "What is this?" Mark asked, wiping his nose. "Your salvation," Susan said. "These are employment contracts and non-disclosure agreements and a lease." She began to pace slowly, lecturing as if they were junior developers failing to grasp a basic concept. "Here's the reality. I own this house. I own the cars you are driving. I own the clothes on your backs, legally speaking, since they were purchased with stolen funds. You have nowhere to go, no money, and you are facing decades of crushing corporate debt and potential criminal charges. Or you sign these." Beatrice picked up her packet, her hands trembling. "Employment? Doing what?" "Living," Susan said. "You want to be the Vance family of high society? Fine, you're hired. Your job is to live in this house together, to maintain the grounds, to cook the Sunday dinners, to attend the charity functions I designate. You will wear the clothes I tell you to wear. You will say the lines I write for you." "You want us to play house?" Chloe asked, horrified. "I want you to be what you always were, dependents," Susan said brutally. "But this time on my terms. You will receive a monthly stipend equivalent to the current minimum wage. You will have no access to credit. Your passports will be held in my safe." "This is slavery," Mark whispered. "No, Mark. Slavery is forced labor. This is a choice. Door A is federal prison and bankruptcy. Door B is living in a nice Victorian home, rent-free, in exchange for your complete and total autonomy." Susan smiled, the architect admiring her blueprints. "I'm not kicking you out of the nest anymore. I'm welding the gate shut." The resistance lasted less than an hour. What choice did they have? The outside world held only creditors, police, and the terrifying prospect of actual work. Susan sat at the head of the dining table, a gold pen placed before each of them. She watched as they signed away their freedom. Chloe signed first, tears dripping onto the page as she realized her jet-set life was permanently grounded. Mark signed second, his hand heavy with defeat, trading the adrenaline of the gamble for the gray certainty of a cage. Beatrice held out longest. She read every clause, looking for a loophole, a weakness in the code. "Clause 4A," Beatrice said, her voice raspy. "Employee agrees to random audits of personal communication devices and living quarters to ensure compliance with NDA protocols." "Standard corporate security," Susan said breezily. "Can't have you leaking company secrets. Sign it, Beatrice, or get out of my house." Beatrice looked around the room, The crown molding she loved, the antique sideboard she had fought over Susan over. It was her prison now. She signed. Susan collected the papers, checking the signatures against the ones they had used to steal her company. Perfect matches. "Excellent," Susan said, sliding the documents into her briefcase. "Your first shift begins tomorrow at 6 a.m. The gutters need cleaning, Mark. Chloe, the kitchen inventory is low. Beatrice, I expect a full accounting of the household budget by noon. Good night." She walked up the stairs to her master bedroom, leaving them sitting in the ashes of their former lives, trapped together in the beautiful house they had tried to steal. 3 months later, the Victorian house on Maple Avenue looked pristine. The lawn was manicured within an inch of its life. Mark spent hours out there obsessively edging the grass, having transferred his addictive personality to yard work. Inside, the air smelled of roasting chicken and lemon polish. Chloe was in the kitchen, wearing a sensible apron over simple Gap jeans. No more designer labels. She was chopping vegetables with a dull knife, her eyes vacant. She had tried to sneak a phone call to an old friend last month. Susan had cut her stipend by 50% for a breach of contract protocol. Chloe hadn't tried again. Beatrice sat at the small secretary desk in the hallway, reconciling the grocery receipts for the third time, terrified of missing a cent. The Oak Haven scandal had broken, thanks to Susan finally leaking the full file to the press. Beatrice was a pariah in the city. This house was the only place where people didn't spit when they saw her. They were safe. They were fed. They were together, and they hated each other with the pure distillation of venom that only proximity can breed. Every meal was a silent torture session of resentful glances and swallowed insults. They were living the exact life Susan had lived for 15 years, serving the family, terrified of stepping out of line, their own dreams subsumed by the needs of the unit. Susan had architected a perfect ironic hell. At 5:55 p.m., the black town car pulled into the driveway. The front door opened. "I'm home," Susan announced. The reaction was Pavlovian. Mark dropped the remote and stood at attention. Chloe hurried out of the kitchen, wiping her hands nervously. Beatrice closed her ledger and stood up, forcing a tight, painful smile. "Welcome home, Susan," Beatrice said, the words tasting like ash. "Dinner is at 6, as requested." "Excellent. I brought a guest." Susan stepped aside, and Sal, the greasy manager from the diner, walked in. He was wearing a slightly better suit, having been promoted to a regional manager position in one of Susan's subsidiary companies as a reward for his role in the sting. Chloe turned practically green. "Sal will be joining us for Sunday dinners from now on," Susan said cheerfully, hanging up her coat. "He's part of the family now, really. He helped me when no one else would." Susan led Sal into the dining room, taking the head of the table. She gestured for her siblings to sit. The dinner was a masterpiece of excruciating tension. Sal chewed loudly, telling vulgar stories about the restaurant business, occasionally winking at a horrified Chloe. Susan ate calmly, watching them. She watched Mark refilling Sal's water glass like a good waiter. She watched Beatrice flinch every time Sal used the wrong fork. She watched Chloe shrinking into herself, forced to break bread with the man who had helped con her out of a fortune. Susan didn't feel anger. She didn't feel sadness. She felt the cold, satisfying hum of a perfectly executed system running at peak efficiency. The bugs had been worked out. The program was stable. Later that night, after the staff had retreated to their rooms and Sal had gone home, Susan stood on her back porch. The night air was crisp. She held a glass of expensive scotch, listening to the silence of her domain. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. The crushing weight of responsibility that had defined her existence since her parents died was gone. She wasn't responsible for their happiness anymore. She was only responsible for their containment. She thought about the juniper bush outside her basement window. She remembered how it looked, gnarled, covered in soot, ugly, but utterly unbreakable. It didn't need love to survive. It didn't need good soil. It just needed to exist, absorbing the toxins around it and turning them into thorns. She had learned its lesson well. She took a sip of the scotch, the burn pleasant in her throat. She raised the glass toward the dark alley miles away, a silent toast to the scrubby little bush that had taught her how to live. The protocol was complete. The architect was finally free.